Okay, so, for most of human history, we actually weren't alone on this planet.
It's true.
It's a weird thing to think about, but as recently as 10,000 years ago, there were several different human species walking the Earth.
Yeah, like Neanderthals.
Right. I mean, it makes you wonder, why are we the only ones left?
Well, it's interesting to think about, our current state as being the only humans is really the odd one out. For millions of years, there were all these different types of humans walking around.
Yeah.
It was much more like, you see with other animal groups today.
Yeah, and I'm sure you listening at home have thought about this too.
Oh,
If you're interested in, the deeper forces that shape the world around us.
Yeah.
And it really is incredible how we got to where we are now.
It is.
From, just another ape in East Africa
Yeah.
to this, complex global society with all this crazy technology.
For sure.
And we've got a ton of really interesting stuff to cover in this deep dive.
We do.
So let's get into it. So how did Homo sapiens become so dominant?
Right.
What were the really big transformations that took us from just another primate to, the global masters of the planet?
That's a good question.
That's what we're going to figure out today.
That's good.
So I guess the best place to start is with the cognitive revolution.
Okay.
Sapiens are known for our big brains.
Huge brains.
Right. But why did we develop these huge brains?
Yeah.
Why not other animals?
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, a typical mammal, our size, has a brain of about 200 cubic centimeters.
Yeah.
Early humans, like 2.5 million years ago, had brains around 600 cc's.
Okay.
And us modern sapiens, we're looking at 1,200 to 1,400.
Wow.
Neanderthals actually had even bigger brains than us.
Yeah, but they're not around anymore.
Exactly.
Big brain like that, it costs a lot of energy. So for it to evolve in our ancestors, the evolutionary pressure must have been huge.
So what was it? What made our brains get so big?
One thing to consider is that human babies,
Yeah.
they're born really prematurely compared to other animals.
Yeah, that's true.
Like if you think about a horse,
Yeah.
like a colt can walk almost immediately.
Yeah.
A kitten's off exploring after just a few weeks. But human babies, they're totally helpless for years.
Totally.
And this actually has to do with our big brains.
Oh, really?
Yeah, women who gave birth when their baby's head was still small and pliable, they were more likely to survive.
Okay.
So natural selection favored earlier births, and that led to this longer childhood.
So a longer childhood means more time to learn.
Exactly.
Okay.
More time for socialization.
Right.
And, that's how complex information gets passed down through generations. So, big brains and early births are all part of the story.
Yeah.
And then around 70,000 years ago, something incredible happens.
Yeah.
The cognitive revolution.
Okay, what happened?
The key seems to be our language. It's uniquely flexible.
Oh,
Think about like a green monkey warning call.
Huh?
Yeah. Careful, a lion.
Yeah.
Useful, for sure.
Yeah.
But sapiens could do so much more.
Okay.
We could communicate really detailed information.
Yeah.
Like this morning, near that bend in the river, I saw a lion stalking a herd of bison.
Okay.
Specifying the exact location of the paths they were taking.
Oh.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
All this detail and
Yeah.
complexity.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about immediate danger anymore.
Right.
It was about sharing a deep understanding of the world,
Okay.
which allowed for planning and coordination.
I see.
It's really incredible.
Yeah, and all this communication led to something even more amazing. Yeah. Fiction.
Oh, yeah.
Or common myths.
Right.
And this is what allowed us to cooperate in massive numbers.
Yeah, in much larger groups than you would normally see.
Okay.
There seems to be a natural limit for social groups
Okay.
based just on personal relationships.
Yes.
Around 150 individuals. Like if you think about a family-run business, it often struggles to scale
Okay.
because they hit a ceiling. They can't move beyond those familiar face-to-face interactions.
Interesting.
So for sapiens to scale up,
Yeah.
we needed something more.
Okay.
We needed these shared stories.
Okay.
Things that don't exist physically,
Okay.
but are real in our collective imagination.
I was like, what?
Well, think about gods,
Okay.
nations, money, human rights laws, justice.
Okay.
They're all fictions in a way.
That's interesting.
They exist because we all believe in them.
Okay.
It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Like take Peugeot SA.
Okay.
It's a legal fiction,
Okay.
a corporation,
Okay.
but it's not a physical object you can point to. For thousands of years, ownership and liability.
Yeah.
they were tied to individual humans.
Okay.
Like if Jean in 13th century France
Okay.
had a wagon-making workshop, he was the business.
Okay.
If a wagon failed,
Mm-hmm.
he was responsible.
Okay.
But limited liability companies,
Yeah.
like Peugeot,
Okay.
that's a relatively recent invention.
Wow.
It separates the individual
Mm-hmm.
from the legal entity.
That's pretty clever.
Very clever.
So these imagined realities, they're not just lies.
Right,
It's
yeah.
not like a green monkey yelling lion to
Yeah.
steal a banana.
Exactly.
These are shared beliefs
Right.
that allow us to work together on a huge scale.
Absolutely.
So ever since the cognitive revolution,
Mm-hmm.
we've been living in this dual reality,
Okay.
the objective world
Right.
of trees and rivers,
Right.
and the imagined world of
Yeah.
gods and corporations.
And over time,
Yeah.
this imagined reality has become so powerful,
Okay.
it even influences the objective one.
Mm.
And what's really amazing is that these myths,
Yeah.
they can change so quickly.
Okay.
Unlike genetic evolution,
Yeah.
which is slow and generational,
Right.
cultural evolution is super fast.
Okay.
It can happen almost overnight.
Okay. Give me an example.
Okay, the French Revolution
Okay.
in 1789
Okay.
in France,
Uh-huh.
they went from believing in the divine right of kings
Okay.
to the sovereignty of the people.
Wow, that's a huge shift.
It is.
Like that.
That's like that.
So basically, we can change our beliefs.
Yeah.
And that drives cultural evolution.
Exactly.
And that's much faster than genes changing.
Way faster.
It's like with chimps.
Okay.
Their social behavior is
Mhm.
basically programmed in their DNA.
Yeah.
You know, hierarchical groups, alpha males, all that.
Okay.
But bonobos,
Mm-hmm.
they're more egalitarian, female dominated. But female chimps can't just decide
Yeah.
to have a bonobo-style revolution that would take like generations
Many generations.
for their genes to change.
Exactly.
So the cognitive revolution, it's a big turning point.
For sure.
We go from solitary apes
Yeah.
to cooperating in these massive numbers.
It's true.
And it's all thanks to our shared imagination.
The power of belief. It's
Exactly.
amazing.
Okay, so then what?
Well, then we have another big shift.
Okay.
The agricultural revolution.
Okay, when was that?
It started around 12,000 years ago.
Okay.
But think about this. For 2.5 million years,
Mm-hmm.
humans lived as hunter-gatherers. You know, they didn't farm.
Okay.
They just foraged and hunted.
So why change?
Yeah, that's the question.
Why switch to farming?
It wasn't necessarily an improvement.
Okay.
It was a gradual transition.
Okay.
And the plants and animals we domesticated.
Yeah.
Wasn't like a huge variety.
Mhm.
By about 3,500 BC,
Yeah.
most domestication was done.
Okay.
Even today, most of our calories
Mm-hmm.
come from a handful of plants.
Really?
Yeah, wheat, rice, maize, potatoes, millet, barley.
Mm.
They were all domesticated thousands of years ago.
Wow.
And it happened independently in different parts of the world.
Oh, wow.
So like Central and South America, China, North America, New Guinea, West Africa.
That's crazy.
It is.
So it wasn't just like one place that figured out farming.
No, it seems like there were these underlying pressures that pushed different groups towards agriculture.
So what were they?
Yeah.
Like, why farm?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem like farming was better for us.
What do you mean?
Well, a diet based mostly on cereals,
Okay.
it's actually pretty bad for you.
Really?
Yeah, compared to the diverse diet of a forager,
Okay.
like a peasant in ancient China
Uh-huh.
might have eaten rice for every meal
Wow.
every day,
Okay.
but a forager,
Yeah.
they might have had berries and mushrooms for breakfast,
Okay.
fruits and snails for lunch,
Uh-huh.
rabbit with wild onions for dinner.
That sounds much better.
It does.
And more nutritious.
Yeah.
So why would anyone farm?
Well, and it's not just about the food.
Okay.
Agriculture didn't necessarily make life more secure.
Okay.
Early farmers were super vulnerable to crop failures. Like if the rains didn't come
Yeah.
or if there were pests,
Right.
people could starve.
Okay.
But foragers,
Yeah.
they had a much more diverse food supply.
Right. So they were less likely to starve if one food source disappeared.
Exactly.
So it sounds like farming was a bad idea.
Well, some argue that the agricultural revolution was a trap.
A trap.
Yeah, it might have lowered the standard of living for individuals,
Hmm.
even though it increased the population overall.
Okay.
And it wasn't a conscious decision.
Right.
It was gradual.
Okay.
Each step probably seemed like a small improvement,
Okay.
like tilling a bit of land for a slightly better harvest,
Uh-huh.
maybe thinking their kids would never go hungry.
Right.
But the long-term consequences,
Yeah.
they weren't really obvious at the time.
So no one was like, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't do this?
No, it just sort of happened.
Wow.
And here's a really interesting thing.
Okay.
There's this site in Turkey
Okay.
called Göbekli Tepe.
Okay.
It dates back to about 9500 BC, and it has these incredible structures
Cool.
with pillars and engravings.
Wow.
But there's no sign of people living there permanently.
Mm.
So maybe they were built by pre-literate people
Okay.
who were driven by faith
Okay.
and ritual.
Mm.
Maybe they settled down near these sites
Okay.
to be close to the sacred space.
So it wasn't just about food.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
It is.
So then what about animals?
Animal domestication.
Yeah?
It was a gradual process too.
Okay.
They selectively bred the tamest animals.
Okay.
So like the sheep and chickens and donkeys we have today.
Okay.
And these animals gave us food materials, muscle power,
Right.
which led to herding societies.
Okay.
And as agriculture spread,
Uh-huh.
people started settling down
Okay.
in villages
Right.
like Jericho,
Okay.
then larger towns
Uh-huh.
like Çatalhöyük,
Okay.
and eventually cities and empires.
Wow. So farming led to cities
It did.
and empires. So
Yeah.
then what?
Well, with larger societies,
Uh-huh.
you start to see hierarchy and inequality.
Okay.
A really early example of this
Yeah.
is Hammurabi's Code.
Okay. When was that?
Around 1776 BC,
Okay.
it's a code of laws
Okay.
that basically lays out a social order
Okay.
based on hierarchy.
Okay.
And the idea that this hierarchy is divinely ordained.
Okay.
So people are divided
Yeah.
by gender and class.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have superior people, commoners, slaves,
Okay.
and they all have different rights and protections.
That doesn't seem very fair.
Well, to our modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
But back then,
Well.
it was seen as just and necessary for a stable society.
Okay.
Like the code says, the penalty for killing a female commoner
Okay.
is 30 silver shekels.
Okay.
For a slave woman, it's 20.
Hmm.
But for the eye of a male commoner,
Okay.
it's 60 shekels.
Wow. So a man's eye was worth more than a woman's life.
Yeah, that's how it was.
So Hammurabi's Code.
Yeah.
It's a really clear example of how inequality was built into the law. And it wasn't just about social customs.
Right.
It was the law.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this hierarchy extended into families, too.
Really?
Yeah. Children were seen as property
Okay. Yeah.
belonging to their parents,
Hmm.
especially the father.
Okay.
Like, if a superior man killed another superior man's daughter,
Uh-huh.
the punishment
Yeah.
wasn't for the killer to suffer a similar loss.
Okay.
It was for his own daughter to be killed.
Wow. That's so messed up.
I know.
But it makes sense in the context of their society.
It does.
Because it reinforces the hierarchy.
Exactly.
So it's like these imagined orders.
Yeah.
They create these systems of hierarchy.
Right.
But they're not based on biology.
Well, not entirely,
Okay.
but they are very effective
Okay.
at enabling large-scale cooperation.
Okay.
Think about the American Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
If we rephrased it in biological terms,
Yeah.
it would sound something like,
Okay.
all individuals have evolved differently, are born with a range of mutable characteristics,
Okay.
and are driven by the pursuit of pleasure
Yeah.
and the avoidance of pain.
Not exactly inspiring,
No, not really.
but it shows that we believe in these ideas.
Yeah.
Like equality.
Right.
Not because they're biological facts, but because they help us structure society.
It's true.
And Hammurabi could have used the same logic
Yeah.
to defend his code.
Right.
He could have said, I know individuals aren't inherently different, but we need to believe in this hierarchy
Yeah.
to have a stable society.
Exactly.
Okay, so these imagined orders,
Yeah.
they're not set in stone.
Right.
They're actually quite fragile,
Yeah.
and they need constant effort to maintain.
That's true.
That's where violence and coercion come in.
Right.
Like armies, police courts,
Yeah, they all enforce the rules.
and punish people who break them.
Exactly.
So the eye for an eye law in Babylon,
Uh-huh.
it needed enforcers.
Yeah.
And the American Civil War,
Yeah.
that was fought over slavery, which is a conflict about the very nature of human equality.
Exactly.
So these imagined orders are always evolving,
They are.
and they get replaced by new ones.
Right.
Like look at consumerism today.
Okay.
It's the idea that happiness comes from buying things.
Yeah. Buy more stuff. Be happy.
Exactly.
And then there's Romanticism,
Okay.
which says that authentic experiences are what matter.
Okay.
And these two ideas, they actually work together.
How so?
Well, think about the whole market for experiences,
Okay.
like tourism.
Okay.
People spend a lot of money
Uh-huh.
to have authentic experiences,
Okay.
like going to Paris
Yeah.
to fix a relationship.
Wow.
So these different imagined orders,
Yeah.
they can get really intertwined.
It's like we're always looking for something.
Yeah, always searching for happiness.
Okay, so we have these large societies
Yeah,
with complex hierarchies.
right.
And they're generating tons of information.
It's true.
Laws, tax records, agricultural yields, military rosters, trade inventories. So much information.
Yeah, and that's way more than any one person could remember.
Yeah. Our brains are amazing,
Uh-huh.
but they have limits.
Okay.
You know, they can only hold so much information.
Okay.
And people die.
Right.
So we needed a way to store all this information.
Okay.
And that's where writing comes in.
Yeah, okay.
Early writing systems,
Okay.
like Sumerian cuneiform,
Okay.
around 3000 BC,
Okay.
they were mostly used for numbers,
Okay.
you know, accounting administrative stuff.
Okay.
And they used clay tablets,
Okay.
so the writing would last.
Interesting.
And then you have the Incas in South America.
Yeah.
They had these knotted cords called quipus.
Okay.
They used them for numbers
Okay.
and maybe even stories.
Wow.
It was a partial script,
Okay.
very different from cuneiform.
Interesting.
So these early writing systems,
Uh.
they weren't trying to perfectly mirror spoken language.
Okay.
They were more like specialized tools
Okay.
for specific needs.
Got it.
But over time,
Sumerian cuneiform evolved.
okay.
They added more signs and symbols.
Okay.
And by 2500 BC,
Yeah.
they had a full script.
So they could write anything.
Pretty much.
Wow.
They could write decrees,
Okay.
oracles,
Okay.
even personal letters.
Wow.
And around the same time,
Mm-hmm.
the Egyptians developed hieroglyphics.
Okay.
And later, full scripts appeared in China and Central America.
That's incredible.
Yes.
So now they could record all sorts of information,
Yeah.
not just numbers.
Right.
And with these new writing systems,
Mhm.
you had a new class of people, scribes.
Yeah, the scribes.
And they weren't just readers and writers, they were
Mhm.
information managers.
Exactly.
They used catalogs, dictionaries, calendars, tables.
Yeah, they had all these tools.
And that's very different from how our brains work.
Very different.
We remember things through association.
Yeah.
But scribes were using these external systems
Yeah,
to
yes.
organize information. Think about like signing a mortgage today. There's all this paperwork.
Yeah.
Forms legal procedures, protocols.
It can be overwhelming,
It is.
but it's necessary
right.
for this complex transaction.
Exactly.
So scribes were doing something similar,
Okay.
but with different tools.
Right.
And then there's Arabic numerals,
Okay.
which actually originated in India,
Okay.
but they provided a much more efficient way
Okay.
to handle math.
Okay.
So all these developments,
Wow.
the cognitive revolution,
Yeah.
agriculture,
Listen,
writing.
They all contributed to the unification of humankind.
It's true.
And money played a huge role in this
yeah, money is essential.
for cooperation on a large scale.
Absolutely.
Because bartering is so inefficient.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to barter for everything you need,
It would be a nightmare.
right?
Like if there are 100 different goods and services,
Mhm.
you would need to know almost 5,000 different exchange rates.
Wow.
And what if the person you want to trade with
Uh-huh.
doesn't need what you have? That's the double coincidence of wants problem.
Okay.
But money solves that.
Okay.
It acts as a medium of exchange
Okay.
and a store of value.
So I can trust that my money will be accepted, even if the people I'm trading with don't know me personally.
Exactly.
It's like a system of mutual trust.
It is.
Like in ancient Sumer,
Yeah,
they used barley as currency,
right?
and there are records of salaries being paid in barley.
It's amazing.
And then coinage developed
Yeah.
from Lydian coins to Roman denarii,
And then later the Muslim dinar.
and eventually gold and silver became dominant.
Yeah, as stores of value.
And then paper currencies,
right.
like the pound and the dollar.
It's quite a journey.
It is.
And what's interesting is that supply and demand,
Uh-huh.
they tended to equalize the value of gold
Okay.
across different cultures,
Okay.
even if those cultures had nothing else in common.
So even if they didn't share beliefs or customs,
Right.
they could still agree on the value of gold.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But there's always been this tension
Okay,
with money.
right.
On one hand, it enables cooperation,
Yeah.
but on the other hand,
Uh-huh.
people worry that it corrupts values
That's true.
and undermines relationships.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Okay, so money helped unify humankind.
It did.
But so did something else.
What's that?
Steel.
Okay.
Military power, empires.
Right.
Now, empires often get a bad rap.
Yeah, they do.
But for the last 2,500 years, they've been the most common form of political organization.
It's true.
And they've been surprisingly stable.
Yeah.
They usually fall because of invasion or internal conflict,
Right.
not because the conquered people rise up.
It's rare for that to happen.
And an empire isn't defined by its origin or government or size.
Right.
It's about cultural diversity and flexible borders,
Right.
like the Athenian League
Yeah.
or the Habsburg Empire.
Okay.
There were empires,
Right.
and even democracies can be empires,
Sure.
like the British Empire
Okay.
or even the modern Netherlands.
Yeah, with its colonial legacy.
Right.
So empires have had a huge impact on culture,
So,
like the spread of languages,
yeah.
like Han Chinese,
Okay.
Spanish,
Turkey.
French, English, Arabic,
Wow.
and cultural assimilation.
Okay. What's that?
It's when one culture absorbs another.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, the Zulus in South Africa.
Okay.
Today, they identify strongly with the Zulu Empire,
Uh-huh.
even though some of their ancestors probably resisted it.
Hmm.
And imperial cultures.
Yeah.
They were often mixtures.
Okay.
They took ideas from all the different people they ruled.
Okay.
Like the Romans took from the Greeks.
Okay.
The Abbasid Caliphate took from the Persians and Greeks and Arabs.
Wow.
And the Mongols took from the Chinese.
That's incredible.
It is.
So basically, empires were melting pots
They were.
of different cultures.
Exactly.
And that's reflected in the world today.
It is.
I mean, we live in a world with a bunch of different countries,
Yeah.
but they're all connected
It's true.
by global markets and
Right.
multinational corporations and
NGOs.
in public opinion.
And international law.
It's like we're all becoming more and more interconnected,
They are.
even though we're politically divided.
It's a strange paradox.
It is.
This interdependence.
Yeah.
It's going beyond national borders.
Okay, so now let's talk about religion.
Okay.
It's another big unifying force.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, look at Christianity and Islam.
Okay.
They went from being relatively small
Uh-huh.
to being global religions
Yeah.
within 1,000 years.
It's amazing.
And if you look at maps of their spread,
Yeah.
it's really impressive.
It is.
But there's often a tension
Okay.
between the idea of one God
Right.
and how people actually practice religion.
Yeah.
Like, many people find it hard to fully embrace monotheism, so they reintroduce polytheistic elements,
Yep.
like saints in Christianity.
Right.
It's like they need more than just one God.
And then you have dualistic religions,
Okay.
which try to explain evil
I-
by saying.